in salt water. Insects are kind of on land and freshwater. Learning about crustaceans would be a whole really cool thing to be able to do. I don't know anybody who teaches very much about them, but it's a whole new thing that would be really cool to study. But we're focusing mostly on insects. And essentially in Kentucky, they're in every ecosystem. Maybe not in every microhabitat, but most of them. Pretty much anywhere you go in Kentucky, canopy tops, down to the root systems. If there's living stuff going on, there's probably some insects there. So freshwater and terrestrial in Kentucky. So that's, like I said, that's good and bad. So it's, where did that go? Why is that not switching? There it goes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Such a basic question, but like the definition of insect. Like, is it
we'll talk about that in a second. It is 6 legs. You're right. We'll talk about the definition, and that's a very important. That's one of the main things we want to learn today. But it's good and bad for you guys, for naturalists. It's bad because there's too many kinds of insects for one person to possibly know. One person can't even really know what one insect is doing fully in its life. There's just too much to know. Think about how, I talk about this, my wife's a veterinarian. So think about how doctors, you have one person who just specializes in heart, one person who specializes in brain. Do those people know all about brains and hearts?
No.
And that's just one species. Then my wife, she's a veterinarian. She's expected to know about the brains and hearts of this breed of dog, this kind of cat, this kind of parrot. So how's that possible? And now you're talking about an entomologist who has to know about every single thing about 15,000 species of insect. It's not possible. You can't do it. What we try to do is give you some tools to make it a little easier to interpret. So it's too many insects for one person to know. But the good thing for you guys is there's always some insects to interpret. So we'll talk about indoors, outdoors, cold weather, hot weather, you can find some insects that you can talk about outside. So it's a really good tool to have if for some reason you're dealing with people that need to be educated. So insects are always available to you.
Do smaller animals evolve faster than larger animals?
Do small animals what?
Evolve faster.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
New species faster.
That's a good question. We do know that insects can evolve very fast. Some of our scientists at UK can show that insects can evolve within just a few weeks. So I would say maybe, probably, but I'm not an evolution expert. Their structures and functions are pretty much just as complex as ours are, even though they're smaller. So I'm not sure if that's true or not, but they definitely can evolve quickly. Like dogs can too, though. You know, like if you guys heard about the Russian fox experiment.
Yes. No.
They're changing the behavior of foxes in just a few generations. Yeah. So evolution can happen quickly in lots of creatures. So now we're going to start getting to this, what is an insect? But before you can understand what an insect is, what I really hope you guys leave with today is you know what the word arthropod means. You've probably heard the word arthropod before, but it's a really good word to understand. A lot of people think that means, oh, that's the spiders. But that's not quite right. It is all spiders are arthropods, so that is true, but so are the insects. An arthropod is a big category that contains a whole lot of creatures. So whenever you say an insect is an arthropod, that's true. Whenever you say a spider is an arthropod, that's true. So we'll talk about what the definition of that is first, because before you can get to insect, you've got to get to arthropod. The other day, my daughter, she's 6 years old. She doesn't quite understand time and space yet. She was asking me, we were driving back from somewhere, she said, are we in, what did she say? She said, we were driving back, I think, or maybe it was when we were flying, but she said, are we in Kentucky yet? And I said, no. Then she said, oh, are we in Lexington yet? So she doesn't understand that you can't get to Lexington before you get to Kentucky. Right. You can't get to insect until you go through arthropod. Insect is located inside arthropod. So is spider, but they're in two separate locations in there. Try to think of it spatially. But arthropod is an important concept. An arthropod is any animal in the world with these two characteristics. It has no internal skeleton, so it's an invertebrate. So there's a whole bunch of invertebrates out there. But if it's an arthropod, it's an invertebrate with paired segmented legs. I've focused in on this creature, which happens to be a centipede, because it shows you those two things right here. It shows you it's got an exoskeleton instead of an internal skeleton, and it's got paired segmented legs. That makes you an arthropod. Arthropods consist of about something like 1,200,000 species. It's a huge number of species. Insects are in there somewhere. So, if we take all the animals in the world, we make a big circle, and all the animals go in there somewhere, but then they get put into smaller circles, right? So, does anybody know this one? You can probably read it there, but what's this one? Vertebrates. We've got mammals, fish, and reptiles. What's something that you have to be in there?
Backbone.
Backbone, a spine. Some of these others I really don't know very well, so I don't know what characteristics you have to be a platyhelminth or a nematode. For one thing, you have to be an invertebrate. Invertebrate is actually an informal category. There's no one category that's just the invertebrates. It's basically everything that isn't a chordata. So there's no one circle just sort of for all the invertebrates. Basically, a vertebrate is a specialized invertebrate, which is sort of a weird thing to say, but they're their own special thing. But if you look at all those circles, the biggest one is arthropoda, is the arthropods. And what did we just say you have to be inside that circle? Paired legs, paired segmented legs, and you are an invertebrate. So that's what you have to fit in there. But then we zoom in further to arthropoda, so we're pretending that we're zooming just into that sort of pinkish circle there. And now we're talking about the kinds of arthropods. And I really wish you guys would leave knowing kind of what this is today, this map right here. Because
what are those called? Groups?
These are called classes.
Oh, classes.
And that's a good thing. Now, arthropoda is a phylum. Animalia, does anybody know what that one is? And we'll talk about those. Kingdom. Oh, by the way, I always like to talk about this. So, if this big circle is Animalia, what would be a circle that might be over here somewhere? Plants would fit in another circle over here somewhere. What about, there's another one down here. What might that one be? What are the other kingdoms? Does anybody know them?
Bacteria.
Bacteria, I think there's actually multiple ones for bacteria, so there'll be several circles. There's one for funguses, fungi, I think. So there's bigger circles out there, and then, so we're getting away from the scientific classification system. What would be maybe an even bigger circle that all those things would fit into? All living things, yeah. So we think of these things as being grouped within. I use circles, but you could group them in a square if you want to. They're just grouped together based on characteristics. So the arthropods consist of, so arthropod is a phylum. The next level down is class. There's actually more than 5 classes of arthropods. I think one of them is actually trilobites, which are extinct. And I'm not sure of some of the other ones. I know the 5 here because these are the ones that live in Kentucky. We have 5 that live in Kentucky. Sometimes Crustacea is broken up into multiple ones, but for our purposes, it's easy to learn 5. So once again, before you get to this circle, to be inside here, you have to be an invertebrate. You have to have jointed, segmented legs. But then you get broken up into smaller groups based on your characteristics. So what is class Insecta? What do you have to be in there? Does anybody know?
3 body parts.
6 legs.
6 jointed legs and tennae.
Those are all correct. You have to have 6 paired legs. So there's 3 pairs. You have to have 2 antennae. That's important because some of these other things have different numbers of antennae. And you have to have 3 main body segments, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And these other ones have different characteristics than that. Here we go. So, if we had smaller circles inside Insecta, does anybody know what that level is called? So Insecta is a class. Next level is, somebody said it, orders. And that's where it gets more difficult. That's where insect identification becomes a skill. It's pretty easy to tell these 5 classes apart, but learning the orders, the circles inside Insecta, is more difficult. And then there are circles inside those circles. Does anybody know what those are called? Families. So it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. But before you can be a butterfly, you have to go through all animals. You have to be an animal. You have to be an arthropod, and you have to be an insect. So yeah, Insecta, they have those characteristics, and we'll talk about some of the others here in a second. So are any of these invertebrates? Based on what you know about these creatures?
Yes.
Which ones would you say are invertebrates?
The worm.
The worm and the what?
Is that a mussel?
Yeah, I think it's a mussel. It's actually an oyster, I think. These things are not necessarily Kentucky creatures. I think the earthworm is. Does anybody know what this thing is? The thing on the bottom?
Salamander?
Skink.
It's like a salamander or a siren or an amphiuma or something like that. I definitely don't know those creatures very well, but is it an invertebrate or a vertebrate? It is a vertebrate. It does have internal bones, including little bones inside of its feet there. So we have some invertebrates and some vertebrates. Are any of these arthropods? No. The oyster sort of has an exoskeleton. It's not it's an invertebrate. The worm kind of has sort of like an exoskeleton, but none of these things have these things have paired legs, and they are jointed, but it has internal bones, so it doesn't count. So now, do we see any arthropods?
Yes.
How many of these are arthropods? All of them, yes. Well, and are any of these insects? No, and sometimes it might be hard to count the legs on some of these, but those of you who said no, you're correct. So we've got a spider up there, it's got too many legs. We've got a lobster over here, too many legs. Scorpion, too many legs. And if you're able to see all the legs on that hermit crab, you would see that it also has too many legs. Insects have 6. Pretty much the rule is not quite always true, but the other ones that aren't insects will have more legs. Insects have 6. Most of these other arthropods have more legs than that. Now, are any of these insects?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it might be kind of hard to count the legs on all of these, but all of these are insects. What's another thing that I see about these that lets me know that it has to be an insect?
Antennas.
They have 2 antennae. Wings. None of the other arthropods ever have wings. So if it's flying around and it's a small creature that's not like a bat or a bird, it's an insect. They are the only, as far as I know, they're the only invertebrates, but they're definitely the only arthropods that have wings. So that helps you know that it's an insect. And then they, of course, have 6 legs. Now, I try to talk about this. Try to let people understand this concept of being in categories to be different kinds of creatures. So we talk about kingdom. Invertebrate is considered sort of a subphylum. Then phylum, arthropods, class insects, and so forth. I think of this as like the way you categorize vehicles. In order to be an explorer with 4-wheel drive, you have to be other things first. You have to be some kind of a machine. You have to be a vehicle. You have to be a motorized vehicle, and so forth. So it's in nested categories that get smaller as you go. The reason this is so important is because a lot of times when people are outside and they're trying to figure out what kind of an insect it is, they'll get hung up on the idea that they want to know exactly what kind it is. They'll see a beetle or something and they'll say, oh, what kind of beetle is this? I've got to figure it out. Sometimes you just can't. But if you know what group it is, you can get down a little bit deeper. So if you can just know that it's a beetle or just a ladybug, you're getting closer to species without having to know exactly what kind it is. A lot of times entomologists speak in groups rather than species because sometimes it's just too hard to identify the species. Sometimes it's easy with monarch butterfly though. So the arthropod class is just a little bit about them. These are 4 of them. We'll talk about the 5th one here in a second. And I don't care if you guys know the official names of them. I don't care about that. In fact, I already misspelled one of them there. That should be insecta instead of insects. I'll fix that before I show it to somebody else. This was also written at 1 a.m. last night.
Nothing like a short deadline.
Yeah. I don't care if you guys know the official class names. That doesn't matter to me. What I want you to understand is that centipedes are their own group. Millipedes are their own group. They're a distinct group. In fact, these are classes, so these are old groups. These have been around a long time. Class is way up there. Crustacea are their own group. That's the lobsters, crabs, and crayfish. Does anybody know any other creatures that go in this group that you might know? Pillbugs is a good one. So pillbug is one of the few land-living crustaceans, and you can see them everywhere. So they fit into this group. And then, of course, insects. Some of the differences between these. Chilopoda is pretty similar to insects in a lot of ways. They have 2 antennae. They have way too many legs to be an insect, right? They have at least 15 pairs of legs. All centipedes, by the way, are venomous. Every centipede in the world, as far as we know, has venomous fangs up here. Millipedes and centipedes are a little different from one another. Millipedes have 2 legs on each of those, or 2 pairs of legs on each of those segments. So they actually tend to have more segments and then 4 legs on each segment. So they tend to have a lot more legs than the centipedes. It's not always true, but they a lot of times have lots and lots of legs. Typical centipede might have 50 legs. A lot of millipedes will have 250 legs. So those are 2 big differences. Also, all centipedes in the world are predators. We don't know of any predatory millipedes. They're, for the most part, detritivores, scavengers. Insecta, we'll talk more about those here in a minute. And then crustacea are an important group. One group we're not going to spend too much time on today, but that's still really important, are the arachnids. So the arachnida is a class within arthropoda. Not quite the same thing as insects, but still pretty closely related. But do you remember how many legs that they always have? 8 legs, that's right. And the arachnids is a pretty diverse group. They've got a lot of really interesting creatures. The ones we think about the most often would be spiders. They belong in there. But also mites and ticks go in here. Small mites and ticks are very easy to confuse for an insect. They look a lot like insects sometimes. But they're going to have 8 legs. And then scorpions belong in here. Daddy longlegs belong in here, and a few other creatures. Can anybody tell me how many antennae an arachnid has?
0.
0 antennae. So the next time you're looking at a spider up close, if you want to get close to a spider, you see they have no antenna up there. Also, the next time you're buying, this is just as a entomologist, this burns me up, but you'll see these spiders at Halloween, like decoration spiders, and they'll have antenna, and it's like it's not as interesting if it's not right. It's like it's not scary if it doesn't look like a spider. Also, they put on the Halloween spiders, they'll put their legs on their abdomen instead of on their thorax, and it's just not as scary looking. It looks too friendly. It just looks boring. But so draw your Halloween spiders correctly. But this group is really important. There are not quite as many species as insects, but you will find them. You will obviously see lots of spiders, and people are going to ask lots of questions about spiders when you're interpreting, so they're a good group to know about as well. Within the arachnid, we're not going to get into it, but there are multiple, actually each of those groups there is an order within arachnida. So there's whole orders in here that you can learn, just like insect orders. A spider is an order. Scorpions are a whole order. So there's a lot to learn in there. And then we have the insects. So to be an insect, you have to have 6 legs, 3 body sections, and 2 antennae. And then we divide these into orders. This is the level that we would really like our naturalists to be comfortable with, is the different orders. We're not going to go through all of them today. There's just too many to memorize. But we've linked a couple of documents, and we'll recommend a couple of field guides that will help you. You can learn the orders pretty quickly. Especially the important ones, what we call them, maybe not important isn't a good word, but the most commonly encountered ones, especially for naturalists and people in natural areas. There are about 25 of them. This doesn't show all of them, it just shows a handful of them. And really the ones that you need to be familiar with are the ones that you already know. You just may not know that they're orders. All the beetles together, all the beetles in the world are one order. It's one circle, all the beetles fit in there. All the grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids, are they even up here? Yeah, they're up here. They are all together in one order. So a lot of these things you already know what they are, you just may not realize that they are in an official group. All the butterflies and moths go together in one group. And all these things have characteristics. Can you guess what the characteristic you have to be in Lepidoptera, which is moths and butterflies? What characteristic you have to be in there? It's actually something pretty obvious.
Cocoon or chrysalis?
Actually, a lot of these things have cocoons and chrysalis kind of structures. It's something you can see right there.
Wings?
Their wings can fold up. They have, one of their characteristics is big, colorful wings. That's one of the characteristics, is they have big wings that are covered with colorful scales. If you look up close at a butterfly, and you probably know this just from handling them, they're covered with this feels like dust or powder. Those are individual little mosaic tiles of dust-like scales that make up their color. So that makes them different. And by knowing that characteristic, you know why now that it's a butterfly or moth. Yes?
I once heard, I don't know if this is a myth, that the scales are for the most part translucent. It's just a refraction of the light.
A lot of that is true, I believe, especially with blue, the color blue. I think a lot of the colors that are on the scale has more to do with like refracting and crystals and stuff than actual pigment. But I'm definitely not a chemist, so I don't quite understand how all that works. But yes, I've heard that as well.
Graphic actually goes in like really good detail.
About how the colors work?
Like how particularly the blue, like on the swallowtails, and how they, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is cool. We did learn that there are a handful of insects that actually do make their own true blue pigment, which is kind of interesting. We believe that the main function of scales is, well, two functions. One is to give them color for mate recognition, but can anybody guess why it would be good to have powder-like scales that come off easily if you're a butterfly? Escape. When they hit a spider web, they usually just bounce right off of it. It's okay for them to lose scales. They can still fly without them. So when we put these insects in groups, there's a reason that they go there. We put them there for reasons. Does anybody know what the distinctive characteristic of Coleoptera or all the beetles is? You can kind of see it on that picture.
It's a shell covering the wings, I think, right?
Yes, they have a shell. They actually have, most of these creatures have two pairs of wings, a front pair and a back pair. On beetles, their front pair has evolved into almost like a turtle shell that covers the back wings, usually in a perfectly straight line. A straight line. Like grasshoppers also have sort of tough wing coverings, but a lot of times it's folded over or something like that. With beetles, it meets in a straight line. So that's how you identify these creatures, is based on a characteristic. And pretty soon you can start to learn the differences between these orders. And like I said, most of these things are things you already know. You just might not have known that they go in groups together. So instead of going into a whole lot of specific identification with you guys, because it's just too big of a topic, it's really like a semester topic, merely almost like a 2-semester topic. But just here are some tips to get you started. For one thing, go ahead and try to learn the insect orders. There's only about 25 of them. We'll start to figure out there's really only about 10 of them that you see over and over and over again. So try to learn the insect orders. Once again, I don't care if you know the names of the orders. Just know that the grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids go together. Know that the beetles go together. And try not to memorize the individual species. There's just too many. So what would you guys call these things? Beetles. Does anybody have a more specific, a slightly more specific name than that? Ladybugs. So this is an example of why sometimes it's not worthwhile to try to memorize species. These are 4 different species of ladybugs. All of these are commonly encountered in meadows in Kentucky. I can tell the difference between them because I put the PowerPoint together and I know which ones are which. Yeah, it's actually, this one's 7 spotted, this one's I think 14 spots. So they do, a lot of times they're named for their spots. But sometimes you just, we're not sure. But I can confidently say that they are all beetles because they all have a shell that meets in the middle. And then the next level down, family. A lot of the families you already know too, you just may not know it. Ladybug is a family.
Are there any native ladybugs?
There's lots of native ladybugs. Yeah, we have, this one is invasive. I think the rest of these might be native.
They're true bugs, right?
No, we'll talk about,
They don't have
no, beetles have, we haven't talked about true bugs. I wasn't going to get into those today, but a true bug is an order, for one thing. True bugs have a piercing snout that they use to suck fluids. That's how you identify that order. And that includes stink bugs,
right,
and a few other things. Aphids, cicadas go in there. So that's how you identify them. And that's a really good one to know, by the way, is the true bug group. That's sort of a hard one to get your head around. That's like beetles is pretty easy. True bugs is a little bit more harder, a little bit more difficult. But if you can start knowing the families, if you can get your head around the 100 or so, and it sounds like a lot, but once again, a lot of them are ones you already know. If you can get your head around those families, you know more about insects than like 99% of the population. It helps you identify them so quickly because once you can get them down confidently to family, then you can go to some books or to the internet and get to species sometimes pretty quickly. So that family level ID is, we use the phrase focus on the family as they do on TV sometimes. What is your question right here?
Are the ladybugs that swarm in the fall and come in your house natural or?
They're invasive. That's an invasive species,
Okay,
yeah.
I just wondered.
Yeah.
So for families, you said there's 100. That's total or per order?
No, yeah. So that's there's about 100 really common ones all across all of the insect orders, but each order can have, I think, dozens. But like beetles, for instance, beetles have the most family, or at least a whole lot of family. They have the most species, and they have a lot of families. So there's lots of circles inside of there, but there's only about 5 or 6 of them that you see over and over and over again. There's the ground beetle family, there's the ladybug family, and there's a few others that you see over and over again.
Okay.
The grasshoppers and crickets, for instance, there's about 5 or 6 families in there, but there's really only 3 that you see a whole bunch in grasshoppers and crickets. So once you can figure out the cricket family, the katydid family, and the shorthorn grasshopper family, you know a whole lot about grasshoppers. So learning these families can be really beneficial, and I'll show you a book that can help you with that later. But I really encourage you to definitely learn the orders, and then if you want to get more advanced, if you can learn those families. And once again, I don't care if the family name for ladybug is Coccinellidae. I don't care if you know that. But if you just know that all the ladybugs go together, and know that we have more species, knowing that we have more than one species of ladybug is useful knowledge for a naturalist.